and welcome to A Kind Voice on Employment, Opportunity, and Innovation. I'm your host, David Levins, and at the core of the concept of A Kind Voice is how we connect the goodness within us to the world around us. Today's episode is about how businesses and government connect with each other to create positive ecosystems. Now, businesses are in business to make a profit, which sometimes conflicts with using their kind voice and treating people well, because they got to get a product or service to the marketplace as efficiently as possible. And sometimes they don't recognize that we're all interconnected. We're all driving on the same highway. If a company treats a worker poorly and their car breaks down, we all get stuck in the same traffic jam. So there's a strong interconnectivity. Today's guest, Bjorn Claeson, the Executive Director of the Sweat Free Purchasing Consortium. His organization is constructing a bigger highway, showing us businesses and government a highway to interact that does not exploit the people that serve. Welcome to the show, Bjorn.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm delighted to have you. I think you guys do super work. And I think a good place to start is by just giving us an overview of what your mission and the purpose of your organization is.
The Sweat Free Purchasing Consortium is a network of cities, states, and other local government agencies across the United States that have joined together to ensure that they can spend their taxpayer dollars responsibly when they're purchasing items like uniform and other apparel for public employees like police and fire and metro employees.
How did it all get started?
Well, the starting point historically is probably in the late 1990s. If you recall then, the issue of sweatshops was very much in the news. People remembered Nike being in the news all the time. Kathy Lee was in the news. Her label was linked to child labor in Honduras at the time. And so there grew up a consumer movement to hold big companies that sold these kinds of brands responsible for the working conditions in their supply chains. Well, pretty soon people started talking about a different kind of consumer, not the individual consumer, but the government of consumer. And because the government is an enormous consumer, across the country, we spend billions of dollars on just uniforms every year. We spend much, much more on other products like electronics that may also be being made in bad working conditions. And so people this movement started kind of organically in many locations across the country, almost simultaneously, in an uncoordinated way, where people went to their local government, city councils perhaps, or whatever the decision-making body is, and said, look, I am concerned as an individual consumer about where and in what conditions the products that I'm buying are made in. I want you, my community, my city government to exercise the same kind, have the same kind of awareness about what they're buying and where they're coming from, under what conditions. And so people actually, from a very grassroots level, started engaging then with, the procurement bureaucracy really in the city across the country, and figured out ways, new policies in which, local governments and cities could buy responsibly with concern for the workers that buy their products. So this started in the late 1990s, and it has grown, across the country to where, there are dozens of cities and states and county and schools across the country that have adopted what we call these Sweat Free purchasing policies.
What are some of the core cities that started it, where the movement really emanated from in the late 90s?
Well, the leaders in the late 90s, I would say, are actually not the leaders today. the leaders in the late 90s, they actually the very, very first city to take a stand on this issue was a suburb of Cleveland, North Olmsted, outside of Cleveland, Ohio. That it spread from there to a number of other city and county governments in Ohio, and a number of cities and county governments also in New Jersey were among the leaders. And among state governments, the state of Maine was the first state to adopt a policy for their purchasing of apparel, textile, and footwear back in 2001, which said basically that any supplier to that state would have to ensure that the products are made in decent working conditions.
Very interesting. How did it all get woven together to be one consortium?
Yeah, well, that's a long story as well, and we're not quite there yet. We are a consortium, but we're not a consortium of hundreds of governments. We're a consortium of about 16 governments right now. But it started, as I mentioned, I actually was doing this work in the state of Maine, from the beginning, and and I remember, I was in Bangor, Maine, and I remember picking up the phone and talking to somebody who was organizing in similar ways in Olympia, Washington, and and then in Albany, New York. So we started coming together on a kind of a activist level, a civil society level, from the beginning, and figured out we can all be much stronger together than we are alone. And then the next step was really networking our local governments as well. So the very first convening of governments to work on this issue together, I think was back in 2007, and it was hosted then by the Department of General Services of the state of Pennsylvania. So this was right before the financial crisis that hit state and local governments shortly thereafter, and it was actually the first and so far the last meeting of state and local government officials in person that we've ever had. But that Harrison meeting was foundational. Interesting.
And you're saying there's 16 governments on board now?
Yeah, so those are some of the leaders at this point. It's really some of the most exciting and cutting-edge work right now being done by cities, especially on the West Coast. You have Los Angeles, the city and county of San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle, and in the Midwest, you have Milwaukee and Madison, and then you have Austin and Texas. Some of the real leadership, I think, is coming from those cities right now.
And I've always been curious about this. When you hear about innovative environmental movements or labor movements, you always see cities like Portland and Austin, Texas, and San Francisco on the list of cities that are doing it. Mm-hmm. What do you suppose and states like Vermont and Maine, what do you suppose those are always at the core of whatever new good thing is started?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm equipped to answer that question, but I would want to say that in terms of there is certainly some awareness of sustainability. That the Earth's resources are finite, and that we better do what we can to preserve them and to treat them respectfully. And for one reason or another, some of these cities tend to be the ones that act upon that kind of awareness repeatedly. But I think that when we talk actually about, if we include the whole area of treating workers with respect in the supply chain around the world, which is the work that we're doing, and which is the particular aspect of sustainability where we are engaged. I actually think this is a very cross-cutting kind of an issue. I think that when we have promoted this policy on a state and local level, it hasn't necessarily been associated with one political party or another. or one type of constituency or another. I think it's something that Americans very broadly agree on, that workers do have basic human rights, and it is wrong to subject them to sweatshop conditions in factories around the world. And we should, if we do have a way to address these conditions, we ought to do so. I think that's a notion that is very widely accepted, and so it's not just what we might call these so-called liberal bastions around, across the country that are taking action here. It's other cities and states as well.
Good deal. And you hit on my next question. You talked about sustainability and using resources efficiently. And sometimes I'm a little bit horrified that green companies who want to use resources efficiently and integrate the earth into the balance sheet don't treat their people well. They have exploitive conditions for their workers, and how it's not the same thing. The sustainability movement and treating the workers well seem to be different movements. Can you thoughts on that?
Well, I think unfortunately, you are right that people don't think about sustainability cohesively, as what we do to protect the earth and its resources, and what we do to protect people and workers and communities, because it's all part of the same. It's all part of the same puzzle of responsible living. But I actually do think this is slowly changing. I think in the world of procurement, of government procurement, which is perhaps a very specific technical world here, but it's really, what we do with our taxpayer dollars. I think the environmental consciousness is older, deeper, more broader than consciousness about what we do, how workers are treated around the world. But I think that people are realizing that they're part of the same puzzle, and cities and other government agencies that have addressed environmental issues are slowly also beginning to address worker rights issues. And I think that this is beginning to be reflected in conversations across government, where, the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, for example, right now, they have long, of course, been involved with environmental issues and purchasing, but they are also now looking at, what kind of purchasing policy can they have that addresses worker rights. Down to, city, you mentioned Portland, Oregon, of course, has always been a kind of a bastion of environmental responsibility and sustainability. They're also one of the leaders in this worker issues right now. They see it as part of the same puzzle. There's a new organization, a pretty exciting organization recently formed, which is called the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, which is designed to recognize really cutting-edge sustainability purchasing in both government and companies. And they are deliberately, consciously also recognizing that sustainability is not just about the environment and the earth and how we treat the resources. It's also about working conditions in the supply chain. So I think that a lot of people feel that, I think that we are catching up to the notion that sustainability is one cohesive concept.
Interesting. I'm glad to hear it's all coming together. So we need to take a quick break right now, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hi, this is Corey from Runa. And at Runa, we make a number of different beverages, all from one leaf called guayusa. Guayusa is a naturally caffeinated leaf from the Ecuadorian Amazon. Indigenous peoples in that area have been brewing and drinking it like tea for thousands of years. All the guayusa that we sell is certified organic, fair trade, and non-GMO. And because guayusa is naturally packed with caffeine and antioxidants, it gives you this really nice, clear-headed, clean, and focused energy. We think of ourselves as a lifestyle brand because guayusa fuels you in doing whatever it is in your life that you need or love to do. So if it's one of those days where you need to sit at your desk for 8 hours and pound out some project or report, then guayusa is perfect for fueling you and doing that work. Alternatively, if it's a beautiful day out and you're going to do yoga in the park or you're going for a bike ride in the woods, then guayusa is perfect for fueling that as well. It gives you this amazing, full-body, wholesome energy and helps you feel fully alive. And that's why we call our company Runa. Runa is a Quechua word that actually means fully alive or fully living human being. We're sold in natural, organic food stores across the country. We're also in Whole Foods nationwide, and you can always find a store near you on our website with our store locator at runa.org.
Kind Voice Radio.
And welcome back to Kind Voice on Employment, Opportunity, and Innovation. I'm David Levins, here talking with Bjorn Claeson of the Sweat Free Purchasing Consortium. Bjorn, can we get a little bit into the nuts and bolts of what you guys do? So you interact with government entities. Can you talk a little bit about how it works?
These government entities have come together, as I said, in order to share information, share resources, and in general collaborate towards a common goal, which is to make sure that the products that they buy for public employees are made by workers who are treated decently, enjoy decent working conditions, decent workers, decent wages, and have all internationally respected worker rights. So how do they do that? It's not that easy. We talked about buying organic. We talked about buying fair trade, and there are labels that we can look for that designate certain products as being fair trade and independently certified as such, or being grown organically, independently certified as such according to certain standards. That doesn't exist. Those labels, those shortcuts to responsible purchasing really don't exist when it comes to government purchasing of uniforms and other apparel. So what we do is we start at the basic level of policy. What is a good purchasing policy? What standards should a government adopt? How do they follow up on those standards? How do they ensure that the company is actually implementing those standards? We share best practices. We share sometimes certain intelligence on working conditions in particular factories that supply our governments with uniforms. And we also maintain an online database which basically maps the supply chain of the uniforms and other apparel that our local governments are buying. So if a particular city can see that they are buying from the same suppliers as other cities, and if there's a problem with that supplier, they can approach those other cities and say, let's solve this problem together. So it's a lot about networking, sharing information, pooling resources.
It's very interesting how you're bringing things together, because I'm looking on your website and I'm seeing you have a model sweat-free procurement policy that I guess outlines some of the ideal, and then you have some of the specific policies, procurement policies of the different cities that are involved with your program. When you're bringing a new city on board, do you tell them to look at a certain city or a certain model and kind of help them formulate this procurement policy?
Yeah. I mean, we, of course, developed a model policy that you see on our website so that, cities that are beginning to do this work wouldn't have to start, from scratch and reinvent the wheel. We have learned some things over the year in terms of what's a good policy and how can they be implemented? How do we communicate clearly with companies that need to, comply with the policy? So that's why we put the model out there. Cities look at that. Cities also look at what other cities have done, and they talk, and through our network, they talk to each other to figure out, what would work for them. There are also certain constraints upon procurement, legal constraints of procurement policy that varies from state to state. So they also need to look at, what their state law allows. They can be pretty legalistic after a while here. But there's certain common elements to a decent procurement policy that we seek to promote.
Interesting. So you said you had 16 cities and states on board. Mm-hmm. Are there other cities and states that kind of utilize your resources and copy in it without being like official members of your organization?
There's a significant number of state and local government agencies across the country that participate in forums that we organize. We do, on a roughly quarterly basis, organize educational forums on various topics and have pretty good participation from, a number of city governments and also federal government agencies. So it's a pretty decent, pretty strong network, and I think information is flowing pretty well through that network.
Now, who are you guys? Are you a nonprofit entity? Are you associated with any government in particular?
We are a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, which is always interesting when you work with government because the governments are actually the members of our organization, and so even though they are government, they need to, when they are act as a Sweat Free Purchasing Consortium, they need to think as non-governmental organizations. But yeah, we're a nonprofit, and our board is made up of 2/3 of the members represent government agencies of the members. 1/3 represents 1/3 are individual labor rights experts, international labor rights experts. So I think that's the particular perspective and strength of our organization, that we have people in the leadership who understand the nitty-gritties of government procurement, and that's a lot to understand right there. And then we also have the people who understand labor and labor rights issues around the world, and what we try to do is combine those two sets of expertise to influence supply chains around the world.
So your focus is just on governments in the United States, state and city governments in the United States, and then regardless of where they buy.
That is correct. However, we also do network with similar organizations, primarily in Europe, because this is really this so-called, what we call a Sweat Free movement, what the Europeans call socially responsible public procurement. This is really an international movement, which is really good to see. There are more and more cities, in particular across the world, that are beginning to think about, how do their purchases impact the workers in the supply chain.
And you guys are the main organization in the United States, but how many other organizations of similar size are there around the world? So far, perhaps unfortunately, we are somewhat unique around the world in terms of forming an organization of organizations focused in particular on the labor rights issues. There are many organizations in the United States and elsewhere that focus on what we talked about earlier, which is sustainable purchasing of government agencies, but don't really have this focus on the international labor issues. There are similar organizations in formation, at least in Europe as well, that focus not on clothing, apparel like we do, but will focus on electronics, which is an area where governments can also have significant impact, because governments, I think the U.S. federal government is the single largest purchaser of electronics products in the world. So this kind of networking and coalescing of resources to make sure we spend our tax dollars responsibly with regard to the workers to make the products is growing. Do you guys have any role in the actual purchase of the products, or your purchasing warehouse, or you just kind of help with the policies that the governments have and they have the direct relationship with the purchasers?
Well, that's an interesting question. So far, we have been a policy best practice resource and networking resource, but that is slowly changing. And I don't know if you saw this on our website, but we are very excited about the new project, a new way of doing government purchasing that is spearheaded by the city of Madison in Wisconsin. What they have done, and this goes into maybe some of the technicalities of government purchasing, but they're currently inviting companies to submit bids on a very large contract for police and fire and metro employee uniforms. This bidding process is actually going to continue for several months, and the contract will actually be awarded, they believe, in January of 2015. But at that point, this will be what they call a cooperative contract. And what that means is that any other public agencies in the United States can buy the products that is offered under this contract under the same terms and conditions as Madison. So one way of thinking about what a cooperative contract is to think about it as a big store. And it's a store where other government agencies can go in, they can see what's on the shelves, and they can pick up what they need. And they can, when they do that, because it is bid under certain terms and conditions established by the city of Madison, they can be sure that they're actually buying products that are made by companies that have that protect the workers' rights in the supply chain. So the step here for us is that we're not just now promoting new policy and then leaving it to the cities and states and so on to implement the policy, but we are promoting a particular contract. And we have helped to develop the terms and conditions for that contract. And there is a particular exciting part of this contract is that there is a expert panel, a review panel that will help the city of Madison and other public agencies that also use the contract to evaluate whether or not, how well companies are actually complying with the worker rights aspect of the contract.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it makes a tremendous amount of sense that why should everyone have to reinvent the wheel with these relationships if we all get together?
That's right. And the beauty of a cooperative contract is that the purchasing volume can grow very, very big. So the city of Madison, a fairly small, medium-sized city, they are going to buy $500,000 worth of products off of this contract annually. If other cities also use that same contract, it's been growing to many millions of dollars. And coming from, and those millions of dollars create a big market and incentive for the companies to actually respect the rights of workers around the world.
And are you hoping that's part of the future of your organization to get cities and states working together to get good deals that are both good economically and good in terms of worker rights?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next step really is this could be the beginning of the next chapter here, where cities and states don't just exchange best practices and policies, right, but they actually buy together. They buy cooperatively, and so they focus their whole purchasing power on a particular supply chain, so they can actually have influence over the factories in that supply chain.
Wow, it sounds like a really bright future. We need to take a quick break right now, but we'll be right back after this message.
My name is Claire Bloom, and I started a 100% volunteer nonprofit organization in October 2011 to put food in the hands of local children who have little to nothing to eat for the 68 hours between the free lunch they get in school on Friday and the free breakfast they get in school on Monday. I call the organization End 68 Hours of Hunger, and our vision is to end childhood hunger in America one school at a time. We start programs wherever we have 2 volunteers in the community who are prepared to step up and take responsibility for running the program, and we grow from there. Today, we're feeding 900 children each weekend in 29 communities, and we're growing. If you're interested in starting a program in your community, please visit our website at www.end68hoursofhunger.org and click on the tab at the top of the page that says FAQ. Everything you need to know about starting a program is there, including videos on how to talk with groups, how to set up your space, and even what kind of food to include in the bags. Email me at end68hoursofhunger@gmail.com, and thanks.
Kind Voice Radio.
And welcome back to Kind Voice on Employment, Opportunity, and Innovation. I'm David Levins, here talking with Bjorn Claeson of the Sweat Free Purchasing Consortium. When we just left, we were talking about cities possibly getting together. If a new city wants to get on board, if someone's hearing this broadcast and they want their city to get on board, how does that happen?
Well, the first step is please to get in touch with us. And so they can check out our website, which is buysweatfree.org, and then contact us, through the contact information that we have there. We work closely with an organization called the International Labor Rights Forum, which is the labor rights organization that is based in Washington, D.C., but also maintain a network of community organizers and activists around the country that have some experience in terms of how to approach their city councils and other government bodies and how to develop productive relationships with both city leaders and with the purchasing officials. So we encourage any listener who want to get in touch, please contact us through the website, and we have lots of resources available, with both technical resources, policies that they can suggest to their city council, but also organizing resources. A lot of this is simply a matter of doing good organizing.
So you could kind of walk them process on how to start it up.
I think that the exciting thing with a new initiative right now is that, it takes a long time to get your city to change a purchasing policy, but it takes no time to ask a city to use a contract, in this case, the Madison Cooperative Contract. That is a very simple request, and any city, as I said, or any public agency, and there are thousands and thousands of public agencies across the country, can use this contract. It's just a matter of, do they need the products that the Madison contract offers? It's a very simple ask. And we also have resources for people who want to go approach their cities with that request.
And is any city who purchases apparel, electronics, eligible regardless of the size of the city?
No, I shouldn't say city only. I mean literally any public agency in the United States. Selected, that's a county, a state, a city, a school. It could be a federal agency, I think, and it could be perhaps even your local library. If you're interested in having your a sports team, we could even look at the sports team, your local baseball club, whatever, purchase of this contract. I think this is it's literally a store that anybody who's not an individual can go into and buy things in bulk.
Wow. Are the agencies of the federal government involved at all?
The federal government is taking steps towards respecting worker rights in the supply chain, but really the leadership here has been on the state and local government level for many years. However, the federal government so far has done a couple of things. They have especially strong protections against buying products that are made with either forced labor or through human trafficking. And those rules have been in place for a long time, and they were recently strengthened by both Congress and President Obama. And the new rules are significantly stronger than what the government had put in place earlier. And so now we simply want the government to say, well, it's not enough to protect against, egregious abuses like forced labor and human trafficking. The federal government should really be concerned with other labor rights violations as well, including workers who are paid below minimum wages, who have to work, 80, 90-hour work weeks, who are working in unsafe conditions like in Bangladesh or Pakistan. But they're taking steps, and they just need to continue to work on this.
I'm looking on your website. There's the Sweat Free link up, and it's a whole program for government buyers, for vendors, for manufacturers, for workers. So it's kind of, if I'm reading this right, it's the process you use to integrate everybody.
Yeah, the Sweat Free link up is a database, it's an online database of the government purchasing supply chain. So you can look up a particular city, find the factories that are actually making the uniforms that city is buying. And you can find the factory, you can find the brand that is making the products in that factory, and you can find the government contractor that is selling those products to the city. So it's got 4 steps of the supply chain in it, and it's interlinked. So this database really represents some of the progress of our movement, because when we started some 10 years ago, nobody had any idea really about where the products that our state and local governments are buying came from. And it's really through the diligent work of really the government agencies, the government procurement bureaucracies, that we have gathered some of this information. So the supply chains, if you think about the police uniform, where does it really come from? Who has handled it? Who are the intermediaries? And what is the cut and sew factories that actually made it? Now we know, now we can trace a lot of that. And so this increased traceability, increased transparency in the supply chain is a direct product of the work that cities and other government agencies have done in this country over the years. And what we have done on that database is simply to gather information that otherwise would simply be in some kind of cabinet in a procurement office of some government agency around the country.
Now, does the database just include organizations you work with, or might it include, cities that you work with, or might it include cities that you don't work with who might not even follow good practices as far as buying?
Well, the database only includes government agencies that collect this kind of supply chain information, and they only will collect it if they have a responsible purchasing policy or a Sweat Free purchasing policy in place. So they're not necessarily members of the organization, but they all have a policy saying, to the government contractor that we need some kind of supply chain transparency. We need to know where this stuff is coming from before we buy it.
Interesting. It would be nice if it could grow like Wikipedia, where every contract and every government agency listed in there, so people knew about the bad practices as well, and that had more transparency.
I agree, and I think that's what we're doing here. That there are, not a whole lot of government agencies that are using it yet, but there are hundreds of factories in the database already. There are dozens of brand name uniforms in the database, and we're showing that this is actually possible. This can grow 10-fold, 100-fold perhaps, and to the point where we have completely mapped the universe of where the uniforms that our cities buy are coming from. We're showing it's possible, and we hope that others will look at that database and will want to participate in this transparency project.
And if there was some magical way you could map everything and have complete transparency, what do you think would happen to working conditions around the world?
Well, transparency in and of itself is not enough. You can you have the whole map, and if you don't have capacity to hear directly from the workers what's going on there, well, they're still fairly hidden, and those abuses can continue. So, the traceability and the supply chain transparency is really the first step or the first aspect of a whole range of, what we call due diligence that companies should exercise in order to protect working conditions. So once we have this kind of transparency, we also tell the companies, well, they also need to investigate the supply chain and disclose violations in supply chain. Then they are responsible for remedying any kind of adverse impact, even if they're not directly responsible for it. And they are responsible for operating supply chain in such a way to reduce the risk of human rights violations. Just the fact of disclosing supply chain is a vital first step, but it's not enough. We have seen, however, that already when governments and companies have gone further, disclosed their supply chain, followed up by actually independent investigations of the working conditions, followed up by educating workers on their rights in those places, we have seen very positive impacts. We have seen, and this is in the supply chain of factories that make products for our city governments. Sometimes workers are cheated of wages, they have received back wages. Sometimes they're maybe illegally fired for organizing a union. Some workers have been reinstated. We have seen where the factory requirement that women undergo pregnancy testing before as a condition of being hired, that policy is ended. We have seen overtime violations ended. So we have seen a positive impact that our city governments can have when supply chains are transparent and when they can follow up with investigations. But we still have very, very far to go because bad conditions, unfortunately, health and safety problems are still endemic in this industry.
You also mentioned cooperatives in Wisconsin, and I always think of food cooperatives as wanting to be fair to everyone in their supply chain. Are there any? You work with government entities, but are there any organizations that work with businesses? I know there's someone aboard that sits over the food cooperative that have certain principles to make sure things are handled in a consistent way. But are there retail stores that are part of a similar consortium?
There are. I think that the most big apparel brands and retail stores, they have, by now established pretty sophisticated corporate social responsibility agencies within their own organization. And many of them also work together with other brands and retailers in similar consortiums as what we have established on government level. The problem with most of those organizations, frankly, is that they only consist of the industry, and that they are not so-called multi-stakeholder organizations. They don't also include unions and worker representatives, for example. And so what we have seen in the industry, if the industry goes at it alone and trying to solve the problem alone, they can't do it. It doesn't work. And we've seen this proven over and over again. One of the most exciting new initiatives, however, is in Bangladesh, where there is a new, it's called an accord of both, I think it's over 170 apparel companies from around the world, including many from the U.S., that have joined together with both international and Bangladeshi unions into a binding agreement to make those workplaces in Bangladesh safe. And I think that one of the reasons that we are very excited about this accord is called the Accord on fire and building safety in Bangladesh, is that these companies have actually made a binding, enforceable agreement to maintain safe workplaces. So, and that's exactly what they do when they also enter into contracts with members of our consortium. The agreement with the government agencies to maintain decent workplaces is binding and enforceable. And that's important because we've seen that purely voluntary efforts that are not enforceable simply don't work. So there's progress also, on other levels with companies joining together with unions to create safer and better working conditions.
Wow, that's a very wonderful thing. So we need to take our final break now. We'll be right back after this message.
Okay.
Thank you for calling. Your call is important to us. To help us better serve you, please select from the following. If you're calling about something you're not calling about, press 1. If you're calling about something different, yet also not what you're calling about, press 2. If you're calling, then why are you calling?
What are you really saying to the customer who can't reach a real person? Help your business rediscover the lost art of human interaction with Ruby Receptionist, the virtual receptionist that does what no voice machine or ordinary answering service could ever do. From our offices in Portland, Oregon, Ruby handles all your calls with the perfect mix of friendliness and professionalism, making your customers feel special while making you look good, just like a full-time receptionist at a fraction of the cost. Try Ruby free for 14 days. Visit callruby.com, or better yet, call us, 866-611-RUBY.
Kind Voice Radio.
And welcome back. Can we talk about how people get involved on a grassroots level to start organizations in their towns?
Oh, sure. And it doesn't need to be as complicated as starting an organization, although that's terrific if people have that kind of time and energy and commitment. I like to do this work, with the cities and city purchasing because, I think a lot of us have experienced the sense that as an individual consumers, it can feel pretty overwhelming. The problems in the world feel overwhelming, and if we're thinking about, how do I make a difference as an individual consumer? Well, I can choose to not buy in certain places, but pretty soon I find out that, well, if I cross out one option, then I have to cross out most options. And, and perhaps there are some, fair trade, organic, and so on options that I feel better about, but I'm still one small consumer, and while my individual purchase may benefit a company or a workplace that's doing well, alone, my small purchases don't make a huge difference. So one way in which you can immediately, multiply your impact, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, is to look for ways in which you can actually influence the way that your city, government, or other government agencies spend millions of dollars, and the way in which they set up contracts with companies to monitor those companies' behavior. And that's very, very doable. Any one of us can actually do that. If you go to your local city council with an idea saying, hey, I don't want my dollars subsidizing bad conditions, sweatshop labor, child labor, forced labor, what have you, around the world, you will get, more likely than not, you'll get support from the city council. And so it's a way in which you can organize and do something about a global problem right in your local community. You don't need to go to Washington, D.C. to lobby. You can just talk to your neighbors, you can talk to maybe fellow students, you can talk to coworkers, and you can together approach, the political leaders, and more likely than not, you find sympathetic ears, and they will take some steps just because it's doable. We have shown it's doable. They can do something about the way they are actually purchasing products responsibly. And the first step I would suggest is simply to check us out on the web and contact us, and we can people with all kinds of support along the way.
Now, are there lots of universities involved in this consortium?
The universities are not involved in the consortium itself, but the universities, in fact, are come together thanks to a student demand, really, that they do. Consortium. It's called the Worker Rights Consortium, and so the universities, hundreds of universities across the United States, are actually through the Worker Rights Consortium are making sure that university logo apparel is made in decent working conditions. So if you're a student, then the organization to contact is called the United Students Against Sweatshops, and they can show you how to get your university on board in this university consortium.
Yeah, I would think it's a course lots of college students would want to get involved with and see if they could push their university to doing more.
The students are very, very active on this, so the chances are that you are already on a student campus or on a college campus where students are doing something and where your participation would be very, very welcome.
And what is the name of the organization over college campuses?
The consortium of universities is called the Workers' Rights Consortium. And the student organization is called the United Students Against Sweatshops.
Oh, interesting. And I guess they must work together.
Yeah, in fact, the Worker Rights Consortium is really a creation. The United Students Against Sweatshops, or USA, as it is called, really created the consortium, the Worker Rights Consortium. So they do work hand in hand.
Hey, that's excellent to hear. Are there other organizations in the United States that have a similar mission that we should know about?
Yeah, I think that you should definitely know about the International Labor Rights Forum, which does a lot of work with us, with the Sweat Free Purchasing Consortium, and which maintains this network of activists that I mentioned earlier that organize in their local communities to get their cities to adopt responsible purchasing policies. So the International Labor Rights Forum, their website is laborrights.org. And if you are interested in holding companies directly responsible as a consumer, then they do have resources for you to do that as well. If you want to make sure, for example, that companies are actually behaving responsibly now in Bangladesh or in Pakistan where there are very, very unsafe working conditions, then International Labor Rights Forum, laborrights.org, is a place to go.
And collectively, are these movements picking up momentum? Do we forecast more positive change in the next 5 years than we've seen in the last 5 years?
Absolutely. I think that in the last couple of years at least, there has been a dramatically increased awareness about these issues in the general public and certainly within media. I think that, the kind of explosion of awareness is unparalleled since the late 1990s when we all heard of, as I mentioned earlier, about Kathy Lee's products being made by child labor in Honduras or Nike sweatshops and so on. I think that the attention from major media to these issues, sustained attention over a couple of years right now, is really unparalleled, and that's very, very positive because, of course, that does mean that more people want to take action and understand how to take action.
Oh, I'm smiling as you're saying this. This is a beautiful thing. So Catherine Ryan Hart, you wrote Pay It Forward and started a movement with people paying things forward. Are there any books or movies or songs that kind of inspire or talk about your movement?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm not sure that there is some kind of one particular book or movie that I would point to, but there are many, many films where workers themselves speak about the conditions in which they're working. And there's nothing like actually coming face-to-face with the workers that make the products that we buy. Either meeting them face-to-face or through a movie, but to inspire and to motivate. And many of those films are available through laborrights.org. So I'm not sure whether we have a kind of a classic in this genre, but there are many.
Hopefully one will emerge. It'd be good to see. What personally motivated you to get involved with this movement?
That's a good question. I think that as a person, I've been driven to be involved in social justice issues, since I started my working life. And I think that if I wasn't involved in working on international labor rights issues, which probably is simply a happenstance of a job, then I would be involved in other social justice issues. But at this point, you see, we're supposed to be talking about solutions in this program, but if ever you meet people who work in these conditions, you cannot but care, and you cannot but feel a sense of moral outrage that this is simply wrong. We need to do whatever we can to work with these workers around the world to create a more just world, or because bad conditions for them, if nothing else, comes back to bite us as well. We're all connected, and the poorer and the more abusive conditions somebody across the world works in, eventually that means that we do too.
Yeah, I mean, that says it very eloquently. And I very much appreciate you coming on the show, because it's a very beautiful story you guys are creating. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
You really can make this a better world for workers around the world. There are many ways you can do it. And if the way you choose is by influencing the way that your government spends millions of dollars on apparel and other products, then we welcome you to be involved, and we encourage you to learn more at buysweatfree.org.
Excellent, Bjorn. I very much appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
And to close out this episode of A Kind Voice on Employment, Opportunity, and Innovation, I'd like to remind you to use your kind voice to ask your government to participate in organizations like the Sweat Free Purchasing Consortium, because they make the world a kinder, more connected place for all of us. Have a terrific night, everybody.
Every waitress, every teacher.